Thank you. I am a member of the Tsimshian Nation, which is about 300 or 400 miles up the coast. So I'm a visitor here on Coast Salish territory. So I hold my hands up and thanks to them for allowing me to live and work and play and learn on their territories. I'm going to start with a little quiz. How many people of you here have ever heard of National Aboriginal History Month? Can I show of hands, please? That's actually pretty good. Usually when I do presentations, maybe 1 in 10 people know that there's been a National Aboriginal History Month here in Canada for the last 4 years. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is at Anya, we send out postings every day in our email and on our Facebook to try to raise awareness about it so that people understand what our unique history and culture and contributions to the growth and maintenance of this country has been and can be once we're more meaningfully engaged. All of the things that everybody talked about today obviously affect Native people in both good and bad ways, but we get affected more negatively by things, especially because we have to also deal with the provincial and the federal government. So things that come along from that thing that often trickles down to what the city has to deal with in terms of social issues, social problems, is something else for us to think about. So it's going to be condensed. I could go on forever. In fact, I wrote a book about it, First Nations 101. So when we think about whenever something happens in this city, whenever something happens to Native people, it's not just happening to Native people, it affects us all. If we do well, the whole country does well. If we're doing poorly, everybody else pays in one way or another, whether it's crime, whether it's social costs, whether it's burdens on the health system. So in First Nations 101, I really tried to talk about, to give people a solid foundation about what our shared history is in this country. So when we talk about treaties, when we talk about health issues, when we talk about the residential school systems, it's not just a Native issue. That affects each and every one of us on a daily basis. If you think about it, if you drill down to what actually has happened in this country and what still happens and what could happen for the better. And when you talk about something that's shared, it's also a shared responsibility for all of us to try to help our community recover from 500 years of externally imposed policies and laws that have led to us facing many, many challenges, social challenges within our families. And on the other hand, many of us are doing well. And for us to recognize that things, when there's meaningful opportunities and we have and actually feel a sense of belonging and relevance in the city and in any other organizations, that it's an open door for us to actually try to take hold of different opportunities in our lives and therefore do better. And when people talk about colonization, and I guess people kind of know what colonization is, but essentially I think of it as when somebody or something comes in and it changes the way people think and it tries to get you to all think in one certain way. And a lot of people think that it's just Native people who need to decolonize our minds so that we can get back to the ways of our ancestors. But in my opinion, we all need to decolonize our minds because the systems that have continue to change the way everybody thinks. You have immigrants who come to our country every day, and they come from rich cultures, they come from extended families, and they come to North America, which teaches people that we are all individuals and that culture doesn't matter so much and that it's all about the nuclear family and that we have to compete for resources rather than share it for the benefit of communities. And of course that the almighty dollar is first and foremost in all the decisions that especially this federal government has been making. And I think all of this stuff keeps us separate and keeps us competing for things and keeps us complacent. We're so busy in our daily lives just trying to survive, and mainstream media convinces us that we're tired all the time. So, buy this to make yourself comfortable and do this and do that. So the conspiracy theorists might think that they're trying to keep us complacent. And I might be one of those people who thinks that, keep us quiet, tell me that I'm so tired at the end of the day that I need to go home and watch TV all day rather than talk to my neighbor and find out what's going on in our community. Because for me, relationships is what it's all about. And the more that we interact with each other, the better. excuse me, and for First Nations people, if we're the only ones who are advocating or fighting for certain issues, then it makes us feel like distrust for other people and that we don't matter. And it keeps those barriers up, it builds new barriers. So when you think about, you hear in the media about the Musqueam skeletons that have been dug up, well, those are their ancestors, those are our ancestors. When nobody stands up and does anything about that, when people complain because the Musqueam were forced to put up a roadblock on a bridge because nobody would listen to them, and people complain because it's going to take them an extra 15 minutes to get home, people did not understand our reality. And that is something that really needs to change. And the recent funding cuts to the Cultural Connections for Aboriginal Youth program, which is going to close down 14 very, very important programs in this city. I don't know how many people have come up and talked to me about it today, so it's good that people are understanding it. But I've heard mentioned by many people today about the media, and it drives me crazy that you don't hear anything about National Aboriginal Day, which was yesterday. You hear things from clear across the world. And I hear people complain all the time about media and how it doesn't reflect our realities and it keeps us, distracted from what is actually affecting us day to day. And I think about how do we come together as people to change that? Because really we're the consumers, and if we say that it's okay that we're going to hear about Syria and Egypt and everything else for 10 minutes of the news every day, and we don't hear about this important meeting that's happening today, there's something wrong with the media in our community. So I would strongly encourage the city and universities to try to do something about that too. Maybe Citizen U is the perfect place to get people to start working on that. How do we bring about change in that area? One of the things that, from an urban perspective, I'm not sure if people know that about at least 60% of the entire Native community is now in large urban settings. And unfortunately, policy has not changed, has not followed that. So there's very little funding that's in the urban setting. There's not any consultation or very little consultation with urban leaders. In Vancouver, there's the Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executive Council, which is executive directors from 25 Native organizations who meet monthly, who have tables that bring in other people to help us work on specific issues. And when you have that kind of leadership, and you have the provincial and federal governments completely ignoring us, saying that they don't know who to talk to in the urban setting, that's completely unacceptable. So I ask you all, how do we, as the city or as universities or anywhere else, how do you help to change the way that they do things? It shouldn't just be a First Nations fight, because if we have all of our people living here and we're your neighbors and we're your co-workers and we're the people in your hospitals, then it affects you. And so therefore it's your responsibility to try to help make something different. What MVAC is really trying to work on is trying to make sure that we have meaningful voice, and things like the tripartite health agreement, which has had very, very little, in our opinion, urban consultation in it, especially in Vancouver. I can't speak for the other urban settings, or you have the Assembly of First Nations, or you have BC Leadership Council, which is, it's all land-based First Nations chiefs focused. So it doesn't, and there's little tiny blurbs. It's kind of when you see a youth report and, you'll see a little paragraph on Native people. It's the same thing with Native issues. You'll hear a little blurb on urban. Even though 60% of us are here, it's expected to go up to 70%. And 60% of our community is also under the age of 25. So you hear very little about youth, and there's not much youth inclusion. So I'm just going to zip through things, and you guys could think about how it might affect you and what you might be able to do in those areas. When you think about things like the Ministry for Child and Family Development and Health and Schools of Social Work and Education, in Vancouver, they only graduate about 30% of our kids compared to 80-something for non-Native people. And in in the child welfare system, about 54% of the kids in the child welfare system are Native kids. And so all of the stats are bad. But what are people doing about it? What kind of influence can we have on schools so that the schools of social work actually, when social workers go through social work, they actually have to take something on Native issues. They don't now. Education, very little. Health, very little. It's absolutely ridiculous that people go unprepared into the community, because it's not if you work with a Native person, it's when you work with a Native person, which will probably be on your first day of work. So I'd like the city and social planners and other people to think about how do you help to change that so that it's actually embedded into the training that people get. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I'll tell you some of the things that I'm inspired by, that I feel hopeful for. Even in the opening, the City of Vancouver has been very good now about acknowledging that they're on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. For those of you who don't know, under 5% of BC is actually treated land, so the rest of the land is still up for negotiations. So it's really important that we acknowledge that, and we treat our elders and our chiefs with just as much respect as the head of a university or the mayor of the city or the premier of the province. So one of the things that the City of Vancouver has been very good at working with us for the development of the Native Youth Centre, which will be at Commercial and Hastings. So they've been very helpful in helping us to work with the province and the feds to try to change things. And the Dialogues Project was a really important initiative to the Vancouver Dialogues Project to help facilitate dialogues between new immigrants and First Nations people, both on reserve and off reserve in Vancouver. That was really good. And Edmonton and Toronto and a few other cities have an Aboriginal Accord, which it's a memorandum of understanding of how you actually work with the community and what your goals are. So we'd love to see one of those in Vancouver. And we'd love to see a city planner that specifically works on urban Aboriginal issues. There used to be one previously, and we talked to the mayor about this the other day, so hopefully there'll be something. One of the things that maybe people can learn from is I'm on the President's Advisory Committee at UBC, and the President comes to every meeting, which is very respectful of him, and he writes notes and he always reports back on everything that we do. So it actually feels like meaningful engagement for our community, is that he's changing his whole budgeting process so that people don't have to rely on, say, in forestry, that they have to find a grant and it lasts for a year and then there's nothing else about First Nations people in forestry or in social work or in whatever else. Is he's made it's an incremental process, but he's making people build it into their core budget so that it actually goes on. It's sustainable over time. So that really makes me feel hopeful that things can change within that university, and I hope that other universities will do the same, in colleges. So hopefully maybe the City of Vancouver can do that too. They could put it into their core budget so that things like the dialogue projects and work with the Native community can be an ongoing thing that can benefit us all. I already talked about MVAC and the Aboriginal Focus School. The school board partnered with MVAC, and we formed an Aboriginal caucus, which has led to the development of an Aboriginal focus school, which will open this September for kindergarten to grade 3 at McDonald Elementary at Hastings and Victoria. So I'm really happy about that. So these are the kind of initiatives that we think can make meaningful change for our kids, because if you can get our kids having good numeracy and literacy and a sense of self and a sense of belonging and pride, by the time they get to grade 4, they're going to do well in school, which everybody knows what education could do for individuals. So that's one of the big things that we've been working on. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be coming here next year to do one of their 7 national events in September of next year. We're hoping to get out 50,000 people to do a march to say that we think it matters, that this has happened to 8 generations of people that were forced into the residential schools, and that we support them in their recovery, and that we think it matters that the intergenerational effects are still happening and people need to do things differently. So I invite you all to attend the things. It's either going to be at BC Place or the Pacific Coliseum, and it's going to be a free event that we want everybody to come to. And if you can participate in the march, would be fantastic. And the one thing that really, really inspires me is every day I see Native youth who come to our location at Commercial and Hastings and say that they feel like it's their home. It's their home away from home. They are making positive choices in their lives, and that is a result of meaningful opportunities, culturally relevant programs, and people who are just willing to listen to them and to take the time to notice that they have great potential and that if they're given meaningful opportunities, they can do fantastic. If anybody wants to learn about my book, go to www.firstnations101.com. It's sold all over the city, and in another 300 books, it'll be a bestseller. So.